I think the whole climate change thing is a big topic. It's a big topic in the sense that it's important. It's important if we have a problem. It's important if we don't, because there's a gigantic set of decisions either way. So it's an important topic. And if you're coming at it at the kindergarten level, you should just stay out of it or study up a little bit more. If you told me to bet, if you said, Scott, you're going to have to put a bet, a gun to your head, you don't get out of this bet. You have to make a bet. Does CO2 caused by humans cause the temperature of the Earth to go up fast enough that we as a civilization should be concerned? Yes or no? Is the basic chemistry and physics right that adding CO2 from humans will cause the temperature to go up? I'm gonna gamble yes on that every time, because that's something scientists can get right more likely than not over time. But when they go to the models, that gets sketchy, and when they go to the last phase, which is the economic models, that's just absurd. I'm going to talk to one of the users here at OTU Risk, who says CO2 is plant food. You need to catch up. All right. So here's my advice: if you want to be engaged in the conversation about climate change, there are a couple things you can say that will just signal to everyone involved that you don't know what you're talking about, and that you haven't looked into it enough to have any kind of an opinion. All right. One of those things that signals you don't know anything about the topic is CO2 is plant food. It's true, plants need CO2. It's not a thing you should say about climate change, because while all the scientists understand that, they all do. Trust me, every scientist knows that plants need CO2. Everybody knows if we did something to remove too much of it, that would be a problem. But nobody really thinks that's much of a risk. There's a lot of risk we might have too much of it, say the scientists, but there's not really any real risk we're going to remove too much of it, because we would see it coming so far in advance, and we would stop doing that. Unless we did something stupid like seed the ocean with self-growing bacteria that ruined the earth or something, but I don't think we're going to do that. So if you're entering the conversation at the lowest level, sort of the preschool level, on a conversation that you would need a PhD to really understand, that the simplest, least useful signal that you don't know what you're talking about is to say the statement, CO2 is plant food. That is no more useful than to say humans breathe oxygen. Everybody knows it. It's just not relevant. It never will be. The other thing that signals that you don't know what you're talking about on the topic of climate change is that all the global warming is caused by sun fluctuations. One thing I can tell you, as I say in Loserthink, if there's one thing I can say with complete certainty, the scientists who study how warm the atmosphere is have considered the sun. To think that they have forgotten to consider the sun and all of its elements of being the sun, to imagine that the scientists who study this for a living forgot that is just that you're reading some whack-ass website that makes these claims, and you need to get out of the entry level. All right? So it's okay to enter the conversation without knowing much, but you're going to be signaling your complete lack of understanding of the topic by saying either CO2 is plant food. Thank you. Thank you for telling us that water is wet, humans breathe air, and that if you drop a heavy object on your foot, it will hurt your foot. There's nothing in the statement. So don't act like you added something. And if you think that the scientists forgot to consider the sun when considering warmth, then you need to up your game. They did consider the sun. They looked at the flares. They looked at all the historical stuff. They considered the sun. All right. If it seems like I have too much of an attitude about that, it's because I think the whole climate change thing is a big topic. It's a big topic in the sense that it's important. It's important if we have a problem. It's important if we don't, because there's a gigantic set of decisions either way. So it's an important topic. And if you're coming at it at the kindergarten level, you should just stay out of it or study up a little bit more. But CO2 is plant food is just saying water is wet. Everybody knows. The scientists consider the sun. So there's that. All right. They considered it and still got the models wrong. Well, here's the thing. As I described in Loserthink, as long as you're willing to discard the models that didn't work, and you've got hundreds of models, you're always going to have a model that works, even if your model doesn't work. All right, let me make that point better. Let's say that the possible range of where the temperatures will be in the future is this. Let's say it's a big range. And you got some models that say it's here, some here, some here, some here, some here. But everybody agrees that temperature is going to be somewhere in this range. All right. So if the temperature comes in, let's say at the lower end of the range, they'll just throw away the ones at the top. And they'll say those were not predictive. Let's try again next year. And more people will make some new models. So by next year, there'll be some new models. And they'll look at them all, and they'll say, hey, a few of these models came pretty close. And then we'll throw out a few more. As long as you're adding models and throwing out ones that didn't predict, you are guaranteed to have some models, because they're all through the range, you're guaranteed to have some models that appear to predict. Does that mean that they did predict? Totally unknown. There's no way to know. If you have enough models, some of them will always look like they're predicting, especially if you're adding new ones all the time, because you can add new ones that got all the history right on day one. Say, look, my new model, predicts the past. What's the word for that? The word for predicting the past. You don't predict it, you hindcast it. So there are two situations you could guarantee was true. One, if scientists are really good at making climate models, you would expect that there would exist some climate models that are good. All right, if scientists are good at it and they've done their job really well, the outcome should be some models that look like they're really close to the actuality, right? The other possibility is if scientists don't know what they're talking about and they're just randomly producing models, what would be the outcome of that? Exactly the same. Exactly the same. Whether they were randomly generating them, so long as they were within that sort of largish range of possible, you would always have models that appeared to predict. Whether you did it completely incompetently and it was just randomness, or you knew exactly what you're doing and you just nailed it. So if you don't understand that there would always be models that appear to predict even if they don't, then you don't understand how to look at the models and what kind of credibility you should put on them. Now, and then when they take it to the next level of the economics of it, well, that's just guessing. All right. That's about all I need to talk about today. I'm looking at your comments here. Waiting for Scott. Somebody had a book removed from Amazon for questioning the role of CO2 in warming. I'm not sure that's wrong. So there are different kinds of skeptics when it comes to to climate change. And people come at it from completely different areas, and there are just parts of it that they question. So Tony Heller is famous for questioning the measurements and has questions about whether the measurements have been accurately recorded, whether they got tweaked for effect, etc. So that's one kind of skepticism. Tony does more than that one kind, but that's one he's noted for. The other kind is what somebody just mentioned. There are scientists who say, hey, the whole basic chemistry and physics that you all think is true is not true, that CO2 doesn't actually have an impact on warming. That it falls into the category of, I suppose anything's possible, but if you had to look at a category that the majority of scientists agree and are probably right, that would be where I would look. Because on the basic chemistry and physics, that's stuff you can test and has been tested, in a lab. So you can see, hey, if I've got this little artificial atmosphere and I add some CO2, did the temperature go up? Oh, it did. So if your skepticism is on the chemistry and the physics of CO2, you're probably, and I'll say, 98% chance, a crackpot. So should Amazon allow a crackpot who might have damaging scientific thoughts on Amazon? Well, that's a tricky situation, isn't it? Because as soon as somebody's in charge of deciding who's a crackpot, you'll never get any new ideas. Now, if you told me to bet, if you said, Scott, you're going to have to put a bet, a gun to your head, you don't get out of this bet, you have to make a bet. Does CO2 caused by humans cause the temperature of the Earth to go up fast enough that we as a civilization should be concerned? Yes or no? Is the basic chemistry and physics right that adding CO2 from humans will cause the temperature to go up? I'm going to gamble yes on that every time, because that's something scientists can get right more likely than not over time. But when they go to the models, that gets sketchy, and when they go to the last phase, which is the economic models, that's just absurd. So you don't put the same credibility on the basic science, which is probably pretty solid, as you do with the models, which are a good try, might be right, maybe not, and then the economics, which is just guessing.